4 years ago marked the time when my crazy journey into powerlifting started. That was a time when I had to make a decision in order to be able to balance both my studies, school, and attempting to be a world-class athlete. I'm happy to be able to share this story with you guys. So I'll be documenting kind of my commute from my apartment into grad school and what my day-to-day looked like back then. The way my day would be structured, we had mandatory attendance at school, so we had classes from 8 a.m. until 5 or 6 p.m. every day with a 1-hour lunch break. So at that time I was training 2 times a day. So I would do either my morning or my evening session I would do here in this gym, and then I would try to get my heaviest session outside, some gym around the area whenever I could. During periods of high stress and high demands in school, having a gym here and having my bar available to me and my plates would come extremely handy. I would, some weekends before midterms or before final exams, I would not go anywhere. I would just stay in here, and my training sessions would be 4 or 6 hours long and just involve me in my computer or having my study guide and going back and forth from the bar to the papers or to the books, back and forth until I had both my training and my studies done. So, welcome to my life. Some days, if I was left with a heavy session that I couldn't skip and that I didn't have time to go to a gym, what we would do is we would grab the platform, take it all the way out here to that dead end street, and literally one by one carry all the plates out of the apartment. Do the session out here in the heat, because that would be the only option. So we would set up back there. Around that time, I was driving a hand-me-down car that was given to me by my grandparents, and I was very fortunate to be able to have a vehicle here in Florida because public transportation doesn't really work. Lived really close to campus, so I would drive about a mile, and then I would park about 10-15 minute walk depending on where I could find parking from my car to the building where I had classes at, which is pretty brutal in the Miami heat. At that time I was training both powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting, and for Olympic weightlifting you need a bar that spins. So there was another gym on campus where I took most of my classes it's privately owned by one of my professors from undergrad. And it was a total coincidence that his gym was on the 6th floor of the same building where most of my classes were at. And I was lucky that I built a good relationship with when I was in undergrad. I made a good impression somehow, I don't know how. And he was kind enough to let me use his facility during that time. So that's why I had to commute with my bar back and forth, because I would need it at home for some of my training sessions, and then I would also use it throughout the day when I was in school to train upstairs in that gym. I guess I could have used any bar, but it was important for me to try my best and try to have the best session that I could. So I would go through the inconvenience of having to take my bar back and forth every day. I always wonder what people thought when they saw me walking with a bar in the middle of the street. Sometimes I would get people honking at me, It's I interpret that as a sign of approval. So around that time, most of my energy and my focus was on obviously trying to support myself financially, but also trying to obviously succeed academically and try to fill that void for sports. So even though I wasn't playing soccer, I was always trying to find a sport that I could be good at and that I could fulfill that dream that I had of being a professional athlete of some sort. I think that one of the things that paralyzes most people when they don't know what they want to do is the fear of failure. They don't want to try different things because they don't want to fail at it, or they're comfortable where they're at. But the way I saw it was, whenever you're looking for something to do, whether that's professionally, academically, or even in sports, you have to look at three things. It's skill, passions, and talents. So the talent is something that you're born with, kind of like an innate ability. Like, for example, being tall in basketball. That's something you're born with that you need in order to succeed at basketball. Or if you want to do skateboarding, you need to not be afraid of falling. Some people are just don't care. Some people are extremely apprehensive. Then your skills are things that you have that you can develop. So, for example, I'm extremely persistent. Any sport that requires something really repetitive, like one particular skill that requires a million repetitions or a lot of practice, that's something that I can get better at, for example. And then passion is something that you're drawn to, something that you feel like you can get good at. So those were kind of the three things that I determined that I needed to try to make them align as best as possible. So I started trying all different kinds of sports because that's where my life felt the most unfulfilled, even though obviously professionally too, because I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. But sports was important. So I started trying to try out all sorts of different sports, triathlons and marathons and kickboxing and what else did I do? CrossFit at that time. And I kept kind of like going in and out of different sports. And so for the majority of people, that seemed to them that I was being a quitter. The reason why I was quitting is because I didn't think that the skills, passion, and talents aligned good enough in order for me to be successful at that particular sport. In order for you to find your true calling, something that you're good at and that you enjoy, that you can excel at, and that you can make a career out of, it requires a lot of trial and error, and it requires a lot of failing, and it requires a lot of quitting. And quitting and failing is not always bad because it leads to greatness, and it leads to you eventually finding what you're actually good at. Initially, when I started in CrossFit, I realized that what I wanted to do was focusing on weightlifting. The coach at the time that coached at that particular CrossFit gym, I went up to him and I said, hey, do you think I should keep trying to get better at CrossFit, or do you think I should try to get better at something else like Olympic weightlifting or trying to just get strong? And he said, hey, Steph, honestly, I don't think that's a question you need to ask yourself, because even if you focus on either or, you won't be good at either of those things. And obviously that was the last time that I asked him for advice, but I eventually found an amazing coach. His name was Camilo Garcia. He was the coach for the national Cuban team and then national Venezuelan team, and then eventually he moved here to Miami. And I remember when he first saw me, he saw me and he said, hey, I don't think you should be doing CrossFit. I think you have a lot of potential in weightlifting. And for me, that was the first time that anyone looked at me dead in the eyes and told me that they saw something in me. And that really sparked something inside of me and kind of like gave me the strength that I needed to start believing in myself. To hear someone just look at you dead in the eyes and tell you, hey, I think you could be great at something. And that's why I always say that the most influential people in my life have been my soccer coach. The first time I remember when he gave me the captain ribbon, he told me that he thought I was really good. And then my weightlifting coach, and he told me that he thought that I could be really good at Olympic weightlifting. Fast forward about 3 years, I started grad school, and obviously that was taking a lot of my time and energy that I was used to spending on training Olympic weightlifting, several hours a day, maybe, 2 sessions of 3 hours each. That's about how much time I was spending on top of school at the time. And it got to a point where it became unrealistic for me to be able to spend that much time training if I had to physically be somewhere 8 hours, plus obviously all the time that you have to dedicate to studying for exams and projects and research and that kind of stuff. So that's why having my own gym in my apartment and taking my bar back and forth and finding gyms that would accommodate for the awkward times that I was allowing myself to train at became really important, and was kind of the only way that I was able to make that work. Obviously, I wasn't able to train 6 hours a day, probably cut it down to 4 at that time, 2 hours each session. And eventually, I wasn't even able to sustain that the level of training that I needed in order to compete at the level that I wanted. So I had to start looking for something else to do. And that's when I met my partner, Hayden, and he was actually the one that suggested for me to only focus on just getting stronger, just doing things that required less focus, less training, and less energy, like powerlifting, where you could easily get away with only doing 1 training session a day, and you can focus on things that obviously require effort but don't require that much focus. Because at the end of such a long day, the last thing you want to do is to have to focus on just meticulous movements that require so much technique and preparation and time. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I started making the transition to powerlifting. Mindset was always to be an athlete first, because that's what I've known to want to do my entire life. So that was a little bit of a tough transition to make mentally, to just understand that, hey, I'm going to be a student first and an athlete second. It got to a point where eventually I started struggling a lot in my studies, and I failed an exam. And in my program, if you fail any exam at any point in time, then you get kicked out of the program, which I didn't even think it was a possibility. It was something that could happen to me, I guess. It was rough. In order for you to stay in the program, you had to write formal kind of apology and reason why you failed that test. And if the professors and if the committee of academic review, if they deemed that your apology was sincere and that your reason was founded, then you could kind of like appear in court, or appear like in front of the committee of academic review. So then I went into the second step. I sat down in a circle table in front of 15 different professors that were, all of them honestly didn't think that I had what it took to be a graduate student, to graduate from the program, because they thought that my focus was somewhere else, which it was. I remember there was only one professor. He was the professor of biomechanics. And which is interesting, because I actually struggled a lot in his class. But he saw that I went from struggling to being able to succeed. So that was kind of his premise. And the reasoning that he was giving, he said, hey, she didn't start as a good student. She started getting 75s and 78s, and she finished the class with a 95 in her final exam. So she clearly has what it takes to be able to improve herself and succeed. And I remember there was one professor who was sitting to my left that he saw me, and he told me, hey, Steph, I honestly think that what you should do if you want to remain in the program is you should quit all of your athletic career. You should quit what you're doing powerlifting and weightlifting, and you should forget about trying to be an athlete, and you should focus on your studies, because I don't think that you're as strong as a student as you think you are. And I just looked back at him, just shocked at what he said, and said, hey, I appreciate what you're saying, but I just don't agree with it. I think I have what it takes to be both an excellent athlete and an excellent academic student and professional, and I want to prove you guys wrong. I want to show you that I have what it takes to be able to succeed in both. 14 out of 15 people telling me that there was something that I couldn't do and that I was going to fail. Having that one person, and obviously myself, that just believe that I could, was enough for me to be able to take on that challenge and try again. It wasn't the first time in my life that I was ever met with resistance. it's a situation that I've been in many times in the past. I grew up in a family that was very traditional, and I've always been interested in non-traditional things, being a girl, and always being interested in guy sports, doing motocross when I was 8 years old, and playing soccer and preferring to be on the dirt. I was always kind of the unconventional type of girl, and same for my interests professionally. My family wanted me to grow up and be a lawyer or a doctor, and I wanted nothing to do with that. I wanted to be a personal trainer. I wanted to be in sports. I wanted to be a strength coach. My family always telling me that I should get into just the more traditional route, and that anything that I chose to do outside of that was silly, and that wasn't going to take me anywhere, and that I wasn't going to be able to support myself financially, or that if I did that, then guys wouldn't be interested in me. All these things that my family used to tell me about the choices that I wanted to make for myself, that they thought weren't appropriate for me, but that deep inside I thought was my calling and was what I deeply and thoroughly enjoyed. Multiple times in my life, that reoccurring story of you wanting to do something really bad and everyone around you thinking that you don't have what it takes and that it's impossible for you to succeed. So in the end, it's up to you to obviously believe that you have what it takes, but not only that, but understanding the amount of work that it's going to take in time, years, that it's going to take for you to fulfill whatever goal you have for yourself, even when it seems like all the odds are against you. When I started doing powerlifting, it was a completely male-dominated sport. Girls that wanted to get stronger and bigger were extremely frowned upon. But I knew what I wanted, and I knew how to kind of shut down all the criticism and shut down all the negative comments and all the people that thought that what I was doing was wrong, and just doing it because it brings me joy and it brings me happiness, and because I thought deep inside that I could turn it into a career. I think two things. If you're someone who doesn't know what you want to do, it's important to be realistic in the sense that you need to understand what your limitations are and whether or not those limitations are going to allow you to do whatever it is that you're interested in. And if those limitations are too high to surpass, then you need to be okay with letting that go and, like I said, quitting, quote unquote, and going for that next thing. Because it's not obvious. That path to excellence, I don't think it's obvious. It wasn't obvious for me, clearly, because I changed sports and careers so many different times. And it's a tiresome process, but I think it's worth it, because if you don't do that, then what are you left with? Just conformity, just a life full of you pursuing something that you don't love and that you're not passionate about. You have to fight it and take the path of most resistance and see where that takes you. Because in the end, that's more exciting. It's easy for me to sit down now that I'm more stable, both emotionally and financially, and be able to give you guys an objective view without emotion. But there's no way I can sugarcoat it. At that time, it was rough. There were mornings that I didn't want to get out of bed. But I think that I just kind of kept telling myself to just do it and go with it and see where that took me, even if I wasn't sure. Just kind of trusting that it was having a little bit of faith that whatever I was doing was the right decision and it was gonna take me somewhere, even though I didn't know exactly where I wanted to go. I really wasn't sure if I wanted to even practice as a physical therapist. But I just trusted, hey, maybe if you stick with this one time, suck it all up. It's gonna take a ton of work to be able to continue being an athlete and graduate from this really difficult program. It'll pay off in the end. Just having a little bit of faith that there's gonna be a light at the end of the tunnel is what did the trick for me. Just a little bit of trust. The concept of hybrid initially started when I met my partner Hayden. That was how we were training initially at that point in time, we were doing a combination of Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting. So we thought that we saw that there was an interest, a genuine interest for the kind of training that we were doing, and we decided to capitalize on that and create a software that allowed people to essentially train the same way that we were training at that time. In the process, when we were trying to market that idea and sell that idea and create material for social media, I think that we were perceived as a threat by the gyms that we were training at. We got kindly asked to leave those gyms because they thought it was a conflict of interest, that we were trying to sell training programs out of their gym. And so it was just out of necessity that we decided to open our own gym, our own studio, where we could have access to as long as we needed, and we can shoot any sort of whatever we needed to shoot, and that we felt comfortable in, and that had all the equipment that we needed to for our own training. And that's why one of my favorite quotes is, "Each fresh crisis is an opportunity in disguise," and that's exactly what that was. Rejection forced us to find our own way and find a way that we can make that situation work, and led to us starting Hybrid, the online training, and then eventually opening our own gym. We're very happy that we decided to go through with it, and that we decided to trust our gut and try to grow it as much as we can by ourselves. The goal of the gym, the goal of Hybrid and everything was to create myself. And it's not bad to be a little bit selfish. You can be a really good person and be selfish in a particular point in your life when you have something specific that you need to achieve. And along the way, as a byproduct, you can help people, which is essentially what ended up happening here at Hybrid. Opening a gym, being able to form a community online of people all around the world that support and help each other. Opening a gym that allows 24/7 access for people to come in and train, which is something I didn't have. Being able to provide that for other people happened kind of as a byproduct of me pursuing my goals. Whatever dream that you want to do, or whatever thing you want to do with your life, is to a certain extent in your control. It's easy to blame everything that you can't do on external factors. So for me, having that bar and being able to control my training, my destiny, my profession, my athletic career with that bar, taking it wherever I went and making time whenever I had 5, 10, 20 minutes, gave me a lot of power and a lot of feeling of control over myself and my destiny.